Every Friday, 7 p.m., WACR 90.3 FM, New York, the voice of Harlem, with Ash Cash and Miss Tashima Jones. So we're excited about the guest that we have today. We have Mr. Rodney Eric Lopez, and he is the principal of Rodney Eric Lopez Enterprises and is proud to introduce its inaugural product, the Generosity and Abundance Process, or the GAP for short. Rodney has spent the last decade studying and implementing the principles of a generosity practice in his own life and has helped others to do the same. The GAP helps individuals realize a healthier relationship with their finances by looking at them through a spiritual and emotional framework. He also serves as executive director of dancing classrooms in New York City, where he is responsible for leading new program initiatives, supporting business development efforts, and representing the organization publicly. His teaching work with dancing classrooms is featured in the Paramount classic hit documentary Mad Hot Ballroom. His classes were named Best in New York by New York Magazine and were highlighted in the book Nueva York, a guide to Latino life in the 5 boroughs. Prior to his career in dance and arts education, Rodney was a public relations and marketing professional in both the nonprofit and corporate fields. He holds a BS in communication studies from New York University, where he was a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Fellow. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Mr. Rodney Eric Lopez.
Nice.
Welcome.
Now that is an introduction. That is an introduction. That's a world-class introduction right there, man. Thank you, Ash.
And that is a world-class introduction for a world-class person. We read the bio, but as we do with all our guests, tell us in your words, who is Rodney Eric Lopez?
Thank you for the opportunity. First, Ash and Tashima, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be on your program. Thank you for allowing me to speak, not just to you here in the studio, but also to your listeners and to your audience. It's really an honor for me to do so. Rodney Eric Lopez is, in short, a stand for generosity, gratitude, faith, and service in the world. I mean, that's what I'm a stand for. That is what I try to be about in every aspect of my life, and it is what I have spent my entire adult life really trying to be. And what I feel is that no matter what space you're in, as a person, as a professional, as a family person, in whatever you are, whatever space you find yourself in, generosity, gratitude, faith, service, these are ideals that I think you can apply and be about in any space, in your work life, in your home life, in your professional life, in all of these spaces. I think these are really high ideals, and this is what I'm a stand for.
No, we appreciate that. And so talk to us a little bit about, your background first as an educator, and then how have you transitioned that background as an educator to now, educating from an gratitude and abundance space?
Thank you for the question. I have the privilege sometimes of speaking at career days for young people, right? And whenever you do that kind of work, that question always gets asked of you: how did you get from where you started to where you are today? And I like to say that my path, like many others, isn't a linear path. The old paradigm of you go to school, you get a degree in something, and then you're in that career for 20 or 40 years until you retire, we know is an old narrative. It's an old paradigm. It doesn't really work anymore for everybody. And so I have sort of a non-traditional career path. As you mentioned, I'm a proud graduate of NYU, New York University, right here in New York. Baby. NYU in the house. Yeah. And I have a journalism degree, a communications degree. And my initial goal, like in life, right, like when I was a kid, I said I wanted to be the Puerto Rican Bryant Gumbel and the Puerto Rican Phil Donahue. Like, I looked at those guys on TV and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to help people tell their stories, and I want to do it in a way that's educational, but that's also fun and that's interesting. And so I went into college with that being sort of the goal. I wound up sort of taking a sidetrack into public relations instead, into marketing. So I didn't go into the journalism space. I went into the PR space and had a really just a fulfilling career there and an enjoyable career in that space. I worked in the nonprofit sectors. I started in Harlem, right here in Harlem, working for North General Hospital. And then I went into working for the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, which was doing a lot of economic development work right here in this neighborhood. But then I went corporate, and then I lost my desire. I kind of went corporate. I kind of went after that corporate space. I kind of went after that corporate money. I kind of went after that sort of like that downtown professional experience. And while it had a lot to offer, professionally, I found myself being less interested in the work and less connected to the soul of the work. While this was happening, I had met somebody. I was dating a young lady who was a dancer, and she introduced me to the dance world. And little by little, I got into salsa dancing. I got into ballroom dancing, and before I knew it, I was teaching in the evenings.
Wow!
And I was teaching adults, and I found a passion for the arts. I found a passion for dance and for music that I didn't realize that I had. Wow. I'm going to skip a few years and moved to where a dance partner that I had introduced me to this wonderful man named Pierre Dulaine, who was bringing ballroom dance into schools. And I met him one day, and he said, we're looking for more men to do this work. Would you be interested in working with kids in the school system? I said, yeah, sure. And so I did that for what I thought was going to be 6 months, and it wound up being 17 years later,
Wow.
right? And finding a new path. Now, where does this all tie in? It ties in because right around that time that I switched careers and became a teaching artist, I had a change in lifestyle. I had a change in income. It went down. I had a change in what I thought was security. The income went away, certainly in terms of the level that it was at. The benefits went away. What do you get when you go to work? Right, you get that paycheck and you get those benefits. Right. And all of a sudden, the safety net that I thought I had was kind of gone. Soon after that, the mouths came. I had 2 children. I had mouths to feed. I had a growing family, and I had to provide for them on what was essentially a dancer's salary in New York City. And it was in that time that some old sort of demons came back to haunt me. My student loan debt came back and was like, pay up. It's time to pay up. And some tax debt that I was in. I had gotten into some tax trouble a few years earlier, and I found myself going to the ATM one day and putting the ATM card in and getting the message back that it was declined,
Wow.
that there's no funds available. I went and see the teller, and I said, "What's up? I had just gotten paid. There should be some money in the account." And I remember the lady telling me, like it was yesterday. She said, "Your accounts have been seized by the IRS." Wow. I had a credit union account as well. I ran over there. I was in Washington Heights. I ran to the credit union, and I said, "Let me take out my money before they said they got it already."
Wow.
So there wasn't a whole lot in there, but my bills were supposed to be paid with that money. Right. And all of a sudden I found myself going from having what I thought was a comfortable living to having a tenuous living to having like no money in the bank, literally. Wow. And went through several years of wage garnishments and at a very high percentage and literally borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. There's a guy who says, and I never forget this, you have 3 piles when you're in this situation. You have 3 piles. You have of bills. You have pay now, pay later, and don't pay. And when you take something out of pay now, you move pay later to pay now, and you move don't pay to pay later. Right. And that was how Con Ed was going. That was how the phone was going, and so that was several years of that. And Ash, I have to tell you, the biggest thing about that experience was not the financial hardship. It was the shame associated with it.
Preach.
The fact that here I was supposed to be a smart guy, right? And number one, I left a career that was paying well. So my dad wasn't too happy about that. He said, "That's not what we sent you to college for. We didn't send you to college to be a dancer. How dare you go, pursue your passion?" He never said that, but he implied it around the dinner table. And then And then, like, how do I find myself in debt? How do I find myself in trouble with the IRS and with New York State taxation? How do I find myself, defaulting on my student loans? How do I find myself in a position where I've got 2 babies and I'm hustling to pay, teach as many private lessons as I can, to pay the bills? How does that happen? And a lot of stuff is at work there. The man thing kicks in, the pride thing kicks in, the Latino man pride thing kicks in. Like, all of it kicks in really hard, right. where it's like you are supposed to provide for your family, and when you can't, right. You are somehow a failure. And so it was although on the outside I was always smiling and I was always personable and friendly, on the inside I was feeling pain. On the inside, I was feeling ashamed. On the inside, I was feeling guilt for mistakes that I thought I should not have made. And so what happens when you go into that place? You don't talk about money. Right. You don't talk to people about your money problems, because number one, it's supposed to be politically incorrect to talk about your money, and number two, when you've made the mistakes that I've made, how can I share that with people without feeling personally embarrassed? Mm-hmm. And so it was there was a few years there where it was dark and it was embarrassing. And so at that time, right around that time, I had started to go back. To church, and I had been out of the church for a long time because I had just some bad experiences with religion, and I was like, I'm done with that, and later for church and that kind of thing. But I had a growing family, and their mom and I at the time said, you know what, it's important to raise your children in a spiritual environment. And so reluctantly, I started going back to church on Sundays, and we hopped around. We did some church hopping for a while, and eventually we found a church that we were kind of happy with. We lived in the Bronx, and this church was in Manhattan, and we were schlepping down there on Sunday mornings. And one of the first series of sermons that I heard was a series called Financial Peace, based on Dave Ramsey's work. And the first thing I heard was that if you want to shift your financial situation, it starts with what you can give. It starts with what you can give. And for me, something, and I don't know what it was, something inside of me there turned on. Something clicked, because there's something counterintuitive about that statement. When you are in a position of lack, when you are in a position of scarcity, the last thing you want to think about is giving some of that away. You're trying to hold on to everything that you have. But something rang true, and it just kept me listening. And the message continued with, when you start with what you give, things start to shift. And when you think about living on less than 100% of your income, your relationship to your money changes. Now, over time, I realized that's an old message. There's nothing, that message is as old as houses of worship, right? But there was something that was kind of fresh and new in that statement for me, and it touched me in a way that I hadn't been touched before around money. And so I just got really curious about it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give this thing a shot. And he challenged people. He said, look, set aside something and give it and see what happens. It was put to the people as a challenge. And so I said, all right, I'm going to take you on, and almost looking to prove him wrong, right? Almost looking to say, okay, this is not going to work, right? Like the typical skeptic. And over time, as I engaged in a generosity practice, really being intentional about what I'm doing with my money, even the little bit that was left over, the universe shifted in a way that I think at this point I can explain better, but certainly at the time I could not explain. Resources showed up. People showed up. Situations opened up that poured abundance into my life. And as a result, my finances over time, not overnight, but over time, turned around. And the most important thing, Ash, the most important thing, Tashima, that changed was my relationship to the money story. I was able to begin to let go of the guilt and the shame associated with my story. And as I started to talk about it, other people started to say, I get it. I get you. And we're going through the same thing. Or we know people who are going through the same thing. And as you find community in that, you find support. And so I eventually switched churches, but I was committed to learning more about this whole generosity thing and this whole giving thing. And that was the birth of the Generosity and Abundance process. I started some modest classes, some growth groups in my church at New Day Church in the Bronx, and then one thing led to another. And about going on almost 3 years now, the creation of this new curriculum, the Generosity and Abundance process, began. And it's really the next chapter in what for me has just been a walk and a journey of discovering my purpose, discovering my gifts and what gifts I have to give to the world. And in each leg of that journey, I have found that the more I give of myself, the more I get back.
Wow.
And this is where I am today.
That is amazing. And you don't have to explain it because I believe it. But how would you explain the whole aspect of giving and receiving to someone who may not understand it?
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, we talk a lot about our relationship with money. We talk about the universe. We talk about getting your mind right. We talk about those things on this show because we live it, and so many of our guests come on and share their journeys and how Jay-Z, that spirit stuff really works. So how would you explain it to a person who may not necessarily understand it? Because I find that some things you don't have to always understand how it works. It just works.
That's right. I appreciate that question, and I have certainly given that a lot of thought as I've engaged in sort of generosity thinking and generosity research over the last several years. I look at it this way: when are you afraid? When are people afraid? When does fear kick in? Right? In general, most of the time, fear kicks in when you don't know something. Fear kicks in when you don't have information. Now, sometimes I'm not talking about if somebody is physically trying to, assault you or something. That's a different kind of fear. But I'm talking about fear of the unknown. When you don't understand something, you fear it, right? And I feel like what a generosity practice is, it's taking a step into the unknown. And what it's saying is, I trust the universe. If you are a God-fearing person, you could say, I trust God. Your spiritual religious affiliation is less important. What is important is I trust that the abundant universe that brought me into being is going to provide for me and is not going to let me fail. And so giving into that space is going to reap something in my life that is going to outweigh what the gift originally was. And it's not, and don't get it wrong and don't get it twisted. It's not, I give $10, I'm going to get $10. If I give $10, I'm going to get 20 back. It's not the casino. It is a spiritual principle. It is a fundamental universal principle that even science and research is validating, that those who intentionally give are at greater peace, have greater peace of mind, and in general have greater financial peace because they are less tied to the things that they feel they're scarce about. And it's like that whole it's like that analogy, right? Like if you are squeezing a bar of soap too tight, it slips out of your hands. If you are squeezing a spring with too much force in your hand, your hand will give out. Anything we are holding on to too tightly in a mindset and in a framework of scarcity, we'll lose.
Definitely. And when you realize that money is currency,
Absolutely.
It flows. And I relate it to a farmer. Even, you sow a seed, you get so much more back. Even our breathing, we give off that carbon dioxide and receive that oxygen.
Absolutely.
And like the trees, everything
I miss biology
in earth. But everything in earth is always giving.
Yeah.
Everything. So when you think about us as humans and being made up of the things in the earth. Like, once we give off something, we're definitely going to get it back. So like I said, you didn't have to convince me, but for those who may not understand,
Of course.
we had to really share that because it's definitely something that Ash actually speaks about often as well.
No, it's like I don't even gotta say nothing.
I
Like,
know.
I'm good because and it feels good because a lot of times where you have these thought processes that you know deep down that you've experienced, and to have somebody come in and just kind of share like literally the same exact story. And so my listeners have probably heard my story over and over, so I won't say it, but exactly though, like what you went through with losing and shame and everything that you said, like it's a mirror. Like I'm literally listening to myself talk.
Definitely.
So fast shout to you.
Same here.
And I was just gonna say, and I think, and we'll get into this in the next part of the show, I think, but I also think that's why you and I resonated when we eventually connected, right? Because there were similarities in our stories and in our approach, and I saw in you when I saw Mind Right, Money Right. Shout out to my friend Tasha Bailey who connected us. I saw a kindred spirit, and I saw somebody who was speaking the language of the mentality around it, the mentality around finances, and appreciating the abundance that already exists. And so just acknowledging you for that. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And can we speak a little bit about that shame? Because oftentimes the shame is not coming from within. It's coming from what we're assuming, or what we're assuming other people are thinking, and even what they are actually saying to us. So the shame that comes with, not necessarily being in the financial position that you prefer to be in, where does that really come from? Or in your situation, did it come from you, thinking that about yourself, or what others may have thought about you?
Oh man, we can spend an hour just on that
say,
question.
like,
We can spend an hour just on that question. All right, so and Tashima told me not to hit the table because it was gonna show up on the mic, and I'm like pounding the table. So here's the deal. I mean, first of all, I think we have to look at finances in the context of the culture we live in. We live in a consumerist culture that is companies spend millions of dollars trying to get in our heads. Mm-hmm. They spend millions of dollars in research on what triggers our brains. What are the buttons that we can press in the African American 19 to 35 demographic to get them to purchase that item when they see the lights flashing on the screen, with every single demographic and psychographic that exists in this country? It's almost like fish inside of water. We live in this country and in this society in a culture that is driven by buying and selling. And when you look at the person next to you and feel like you don't measure up and feel like you don't have enough, and that's the air we breathe, then you can't help but feel like you're missing out on something if you don't have what the Joneses have down the street or in the next building or the next apartment. If you don't have the latest gadget or clothing or car or whatever, you are failing. If you don't have your retirement thing hooked up, you are failing. If you are not keeping up in some way, there's something wrong with you. And if you fall on that path, if you stumble on that path, like I did, like so many of us did, by mismanaging your money, by getting into credit problems, I signed up for the Visa, freshman year on college. I got the Visa and the Amex in the first week. Big mistake. Here's the thing: who was supposed to tell me better? Who was supposed to tell me better? Who in my life had enough experience with credit instruments to teach me how to do that properly? And how many of us have that? How many of us get that education in our public educations? I'm a product of New York City public schools. I didn't have one class on credit instruments, on checking and savings accounts, right? I'm not saying the math I got was bad. I'm just saying I didn't get anything that was going to help me when I graduated.
Right.
So the shame comes from this feeling of insecurity and being less than, because I believe that we're swimming in an environment that teaches us that if we don't have or we don't know, we're somehow less than. And look, for those of you who are listening who are like, yeah, what about the personal responsibility? Yes, of course there's personal responsibility. I am responsible for my mistakes. I am responsible for my credit mistakes. I'm responsible for my debt mistakes. I'm not explaining that away, but that lives in a larger context of a consumerist culture that we live in. To talk about abundance, to talk about generosity, to talk about giving and sharing and doing so in a way that with loving accountability and community. That is seen as old-fashioned. That is seen as so many other things, and it is a conversation whose time has come, as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely.
Man,
Definitely.
powerful. And then so we not forget a break, man.
Okay.
We're not even going to a break. We're going to right because we need every bit of this information, right? The people need this work. And so talk to us about GAP, the generosity and abundance process. Talk to us about your program. Just talk to us about that concept.
All right. Thank you, Ash. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So what is the GAP? The GAP is a curriculum. It's a curriculum born out of not just my lived experience, but the lived experiences of people I have worked with, and the wisdom of the ages. And my job and my mission and my goal is to take this wisdom that has been around forever, and to make it accessible to people in a way that I believe is palatable and easy to digest. The GAP is essentially a curriculum designed based on 5 principles. And the 5 principles are naming and claiming your money story, envisioning your ideal financial future, defining generosity and abundance, purposeful money management, and unleashing your inner philanthropist. Now, that curriculum is designed in such a way that walks you through this process, walks you through a process of financial peace with generosity at the center of your life. But I don't start where most financial advisors start. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit because, I love, I like you, Ash, I'm sure you've got every guru's book on your shelf, right? Like the Dave Ramseys of the world, the Susie Ormans of the world, and everybody, like they all have wonderful advice for people. What I find, though, is that a lot of them start in a place of lack, right? So, like, it starts with, all right, what do you have to cut in your life to have a better budget, right? Stop going to Starbucks and getting the $7 lattes and don't go on the European vacation. Just, do a weekend in the Poconos or whatever, right? Okay. All of that is good advice. But if the first thing I have to do is think about all the things I have to give up, it's almost like you're asking me to, it's almost like, you're asking me to take my medicine too soon. If I'm already dealing with bad feelings, the last thing I want you to do is take something away from me, right? Now, I'm not saying there isn't a time and place for your medicine, right? You got to eat your vegetables before you have your dessert. But what if we did some deeper work before we started cutting things? My program is not about starting with, let's find all the places in your budget where you can spend less. We get to that later. We get to the money management is the 4th principle. I start with naming and claiming your money story. Because like Mind Right, Money Right, you can't get to any place of financial peace and abundance until you understand what your story is, and you wrestle with it, and you speak it, and you write it, and you claim it as your own. And that was when I was able to get past the shame piece. When I was able to say, no, this is my story, this is who I am, not just the bad stuff, the good stuff too, but owning it, writing it down, and actually sharing it. And that's an important first step, because if you can name it and if you can claim it, then you can put it behind you, and then you can get past it. And that's an important first step. That's a very important first step. And so the gap begins with that. The gap begins there. Then part 2 is envisioning your ideal financial future. All right, so you've done some of that work. You've named it, you've claimed it, you've packaged it, you've dealt with it, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It's still there. It rears its ugly head. It comes back. But you've got to have something to beat it back with. And that's your vision for your future. What's the vision for your future? All right, so we've dealt with the past, but you've got to have something to replace it with. So what is your ideal financial future? You have to spend some time envisioning it, being in it, and embodying it before you have it. I saw this wonderful interview. I don't know if you guys like KRS-One, I just love KRS-One as an MC, and I saw this interview with him, and he was talking about the guys who did Rapper's Delight, and he was talking about being an MC, and he says that they were rapping about watching the Knicks on TV, watching the Knicks play basketball on TV, and he said they didn't have any of those things they were rapping about until after they rapped about it and the music was out there, and then they were able to realize the fruits of what they had, right? And so I always love that story because it's such a tangible thing of you have to speak your future. You have to speak it, you have to see it, you have to envision it. And so module 2, principle 2 is let's do the work on doing the envisioning piece and getting it in your body and getting it on paper.
Yeah.
Then you have to define generosity and abundance. Now, generosity for you, Ash, generosity for you, Tashima, might be different for me. Maybe what generosity means to you is giving money. Maybe what generosity means to you is volunteering. Maybe what generosity means to somebody else is neighborly hospitality. It can be so many things, but you have to wrestle with that question and define it for yourself. What does abundance look like for you as an individual? Does abundance look like does it look like health? Does it look like longevity? Does it look like being surrounded by family and loved ones? Does it look like having $1 million in your bank account? All of those things are legitimate.
I'm getting excited.
All of these things are legitimate.
I'm visiting right now.
Yeah, all of those things are legitimate, but how many times do we actually do the work and say, what does that look like in my own life? Do the work, write it down, spend some time enjoying the juicy definition of what does generosity and abundance look like for you. I feel like by the time, just like you said, Tashima, by the time you get to that point, now let's have a money conversation. Now let's talk about what we do to get there. And that's purposeful money management. Purposeful money management. What purpose do you have for your money? If your money doesn't have, you said currency earlier, it's a current, right? It's an electric current that moves through your body and that moves through your life. And you can take electricity, and electricity can burn a house down or it can light a house up. And the money that flows through you in your life has to be put to a purpose. And so this is where we deal with the money management. This is where we deal with the budgeting. This is where we deal with the savings account and the emergency fund and tracking your spending. You're ready to do that now because you've done the work. You've let go of the shame. You've let go of some of that baggage. You've put a vision forth and you've defined what generosity looks like for you. So now let's do some of the nitty gritty work. Let's do some of that stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't have to write the book on money management. That book has been written, and there's lots of wonderful people doing that work. And so, I draw from some really, I have my own ideas, and I draw from some really great masters in this area because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I feel like it's the order that's important. It's the process that's important. And then guess what? Well, if you've now started taking those steps, and you have started to track your spending, you've started to create a budget, you have started to maybe save a little money, maybe you have an emergency fund, maybe you have a rainy day fund, maybe you have something, whatever, then we end with unleash your inner philanthropist. What are those things that you're passionate about that if you could give to, you would? It could be your church if you're a church-going person. It could be a cause that you're just super passionate about around. It could be animal rights. It could be youth issues. It could be after school programs. It could be anything that your heart feels called to making a difference with. We are so stressed for time in our busy lives that maybe we can't always volunteer our time as much as we would like to. In fact, all the studies show that Americans don't volunteer nearly as much as they can. And so what is the biggest impact we can make to these causes we care about? Well, it's our dollars. It's our money. We vote with our money. And so what if our money could be put to the use that our heart is called to outside of family? And so when you unleash your inner philanthropist, you can do so with power and knowing that you have done the work that allows you to do so on a consistent basis. Because if it's not a practice, it's not going to make a difference. And that is my central contention in the gap, is that it's a generosity practice that will shift your financial experience. If you're not practicing it, it won't work. If it's a one-off, the year-end appeal once a year, that's great. Do that. But if you are not engaged in a generosity practice, you're probably holding on to too much scarcity in your life.
And I love that because you mentioned earlier where you said you don't give 10 and get 20 back, right? It's not the casino. And one of the things that I appreciated about your message and what one of the things I know is that generosity has to come from the right place, right? And if you're just doing it because you're like, you know what, I'm just going to give and see what happens, what you don't realize is that you're actually still doing it from a place of lack.
That's right.
Right? If you say, you know what, I'm just going to give and let's see if this thing works. Let me just see if it happens, and you're not necessarily giving from that place of passion or that place of love, it's not necessarily going to work because you're still holding on to it, right? You're giving it, but you're holding on to it. You're holding on to the notion that it's going to come back. You have to give it in a space that you're detached from it even coming back, and that creates that process of, it coming back to you when you release it. When you say, here you go, universe. I don't even know how you're going to give it to me back. I don't care because I know that you're abundant. I know the universe is abundant. I know that when I give with an open heart, when I give from the right place, that it's going to come back. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me tell you, there are folks listening right now who say, okay, yeah, I get it, but. I'm holding on only to this much, and I can't let it go because I've got XYZ bills. And I say, absolutely, like that's real. I'm not. This isn't like pie in the sky fantasy stuff. This is real stuff. And all I'm saying is that there is always something you can give. Absolutely. There is always something you can give, especially in this culture, especially in this economy. You can give $1. You can give $1
and not realize that the dollar that you give that may be nothing to you is something to somebody.
That's right. That's Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And the thing is that there is so much. There's this wonderful exercise that we have in the course where you go to this website, and right now it's escaping me, but it'll come back to me. But there's this wonderful online resource that shows you if you put in your annual salary, it shows you where you are in the what percentage of wealth are you in the world.
Wow.
And even the median American salary, which is not a lot. All right, is still like it's something ridiculous. It's like in the top 2% of the world, like something ridiculous like that. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that to not legitimize the real challenges we have in this economy and the real challenges we have with poverty in this economy. It's definitely real, and the rent is too high in New York City. That's for sure. And most of people's paychecks go towards housing, and that's a real crisis in New York City. So I don't want to diminish that at all. But when compared to the global landscape, there is an abundance in this country. And if we made a small shift in our generosity practice, not only could we make a difference in the lives of other people, we can make a difference in our own lives.
Absolutely.
Most certainly.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I love about this whole process is seeing yourself as a philanthropist.
Yes.
Oftentimes you think you have to have millions of dollars to be considered a philanthropist, but when you bring it down to the level that you're bringing it down to, it only gives room for growth.
Yes.
So that the dollar you give today could be $1 million in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. So just positioning yourself in that space of abundance and in that space of wealth is what is going to get you to the manifestation of that wealth itself. So I'm like, I love the process.
Thank you for saying that, because the other thing here, and while it's not a stated goal in my work, it's an understated goal, which is the democratization of philanthropy. Why does philanthropy as a concept only have to live with the wealthy? Mm-hmm. Why does philanthropy as a concept only have to live with the 1%, the 10% who have to give with those who need? Right? Everybody in this room, in this studio, has the potential to be a philanthropist, to be one who loves mankind, womankind, and gives back to it. And so the idea that we can all take on a philanthropic practice does not have to be followed. It's not a figure that has to be followed by 6 zeros.
Right.
It is even in a modest generosity practice, but it gives you agency, it gives you power, and this is about shifting the relationship with your money such that you have agency and you have the power to do something with it that maybe you didn't think you could before.
Definitely.
Absolutely. All right, so now, great concept, love the program. The people want this work. How can they find or get access to the Gap?
Thank you so much. So I'm announcing on the show today a new product I'm very excited about, and thank you for giving me the space to do this.
You know you heard it first.
I know. Yes,
I only want to say
absolutely. And so I'm introducing a new program called the Gap Intensive. It is a 3-month product where I'm looking for 10 people. Because here's the deal. You can do this work alone and be successful at it. But how much more successful could you be if you had a community, if you had support and you had a loving accountability? So I'm launching a 3-month program called the Gap Intensive, where in those 3 months we are going to go through this Gap curriculum. And I just want to say to all listeners out there, our friend Ash Cash is heavily featured in this because my brother came through for me and we connected about a year and a half ago, and a lot of his work and his wisdom and his thinking is featured in this curriculum material. And we are going to work together for 3 months. And here's what you get in the Gap Intensive. You are going to get a welcome. You're going to get an orientation call from me. You are going to get a 5-module course that you can access online. We're going to participate in what we call 3 Sacred Conversations webinars. Sacred conversations where we are holding each other in a space of sharing authentically about our issues around money. You'll get weekly support emails. We'll get Q&A sessions. And we're going to do 2 mastermind sessions where we actually take your goals and we put them on the table and we support you in them. And then for the people in New York City who participate in this, we're going to end it with an in-person sacred conversation in New York City, where we can actually see each other, because this is going to all happen virtually. And then at the end, we actually come together physically in person to break bread and to celebrate with each other and to celebrate each other's goals. And so this is going to launch at the end of this month, at the end of September. And so I just need everybody who's interested in that to log on to RodneyEricLopez.com, RodneyEricLopez. I forgot how to spell my own name. RodneyEricLopez.com. And when you opt in, you're gonna type your information in, and then you're gonna just say, I'm interested in the intensive, the Gap Intensive, and we would love to have you. And if you need more information, we'll send you some information. But please log on to RodneyEricLopez.com and join us at the Gap.
Wow.
Man.
We need you to come back.
Man.
I'm just
I
putting
would
that
love
out
to
there.
come
Man, powerful, powerful, powerful.
Yes.
Round of applause.
Yes.
Brother, we truly appreciate you. So definitely remember, guys, go to RodneyEricLopez.com. Put in that you're interested in the intensive, so you can get this work. This is powerful stuff. You've heard it from me. Now you're hearing it from him. This stuff works. It really, really works. And you definitely have to connect with him. If somebody wanted to connect with you online, where can they find you?
You can find me at RodneyEricLopez.com. You can email me at info@RodneyEricLopez.com. And the Twitter, the Facebook, it's all Rodney Eric Lopez. So you can do at Rodney Eric Lopez at Twitter, Instagram, all that. Rodney Eric Lopez is the handle.